renewables and environmental stewardship, thinking through all the implications. Renewable energy has numerous obvious advantages over burning coal and other traditional power sources. Yet each of the various clean energy technologies is accompanied by a certain environmental impact, all of which need to be understood clearly. Audubon's mission is to conserve and restore natural ecosystems, focusing on birds, other wildlife, and their habitats for the benefit of humanity and the Earth's biological diversity. Brian Rutledge functions as Audubon Wyoming's executive director, and provided this very candid and poignant conversation. Craig Shields, I've read some of your stuff, and it's excellent. We want renewables, but they come at a cost, and part of that cost, ironically, is ecological. Is that what you would say? Brian Rutledge, exactly. CS, so, as a person who's actually studied the issues, what are the costs associated with migration to renewables? BR, well, first, I think there's a huge opportunity here. We do need renewables to work. But I'm not utterly convinced that we've done our homework on the technology. I think we're racing quite a bit right now. We have good intentions, but we need to be deliberate in all our moves. We've seen before, when we tried to develop the supposedly clean natural gas, what that's done to the environment. We've also had the early experience with the renewables with damming all of our rivers. We're still in the process of trying to recover from that. So to me it seems like there's a great deal to be studied here, and then we need to do this with care and caution, rather than racing in and grabbing at the first opportunities, saying to hell with the environment and the animals and the wilderness. CS, I don't think anyone could dispute what you're saying, but can you give me an example? BR, here's what we've seen in our direct work in trying to cope with the greater sage grouse, a species that is walking on the brink of extinction, and the experience around it with renewable development. The bird was somewhere about 85% and 90% greater in numbers than it is now at the turn of the prior century. If you read about it a little, you'll find that George Bird Grinnell and Teddy Roosevelt camped at the foot of some bluffs south of Casper, and when the bird started flying down to graze along the river, they blacked out the sky until noon. And now we're down to a couple of 100,000 birds. We started off by first fragmenting the sagebrush habitat, then going through a long process of where the belief system was that the only good sagebrush is dead sage. So you obliterate sagebrush by fire. And I want to stress that this greater sage grouse is a litmus species, one that tells us what's going on with that whole ecosystem. It's not a single system management question. We look at the sage grouse as an indicator as to how the rest of the system is doing. There are at least 3 other species of birds out there now that are in even greater trouble than the sage grouse. They're just harder to study. CS, I see. BR, sage grouse all show up on a lake, or dancing ground in the springtime, and you can count all the males, and if you work hard at it you can count quite a few of the females. And so you'll know how the population is doing year by year by doing these lek counts. So now we've got years of lek count studies, and then we've found that as coal bed methane began to be developed, largely in the Powder River Basin, and as coal or as natural gas methane began to be developed in deeper seams in western Wyoming, we've seen massive fragmentation of the land and plummeting decline in the numbers of birds. In Powder River Basin, declines are in the neighborhood of 84%. So areas that were once gems of great sagebrush are no longer. We had negotiated very hard in Wyoming, I will say, for 2 years to build a system by which the gas industry, agriculture, the conservation community, and all the agencies negotiated a deal that would protect about 80% of the birds in the core areas. We established a deal where the perimeters of those breeding areas were led by peer-reviewed research, and we decided on a methodology under which those areas could be developed for gas, but in such a way that they wouldn't diminish the number of birds. And that is a 5% cap on development per section. So each square mile would get a maximum development of one drilling pad, and all roads, pipelines, power lines, all the rest of it, would add up to no more than 5% of the entire section. We all agreed to this, and began working on it. But then suddenly the wind boom started. The wind people didn't figure that any of this applied to them. And we tried to have a negotiated discussion with them and were basically told, "We're saving the world, we don't need your permission. We're going to do what we want." And it was really astounding to have people doing this kind of capitalist charge in the name of the environment. If there had been any real thought and concern, this would have been done in southeastern Wyoming, because southeastern Wyoming already has a human footprint. And we've done a lot of the groundbreaking work on that, on establishing where the renewable resources are available in well-established human footprints. And in the case of Wyoming, that turns out to be the southeastern quadrant. But the wind people want to do it out in the sagebrush. They say, "We need to be closer to Vegas. We need to be closer to shipping our fuel, our product, south and west." Well, guys, you know that's gonna destroy the species and this ecosystem. And they reply, "Not our problem. And besides, and this is my favorite, you don't know how a wind farm's going to affect it." In other words, the development of a wind farm may have a different impact on the grouse than development of the gas fields. CS, well, isn't that possible? BR, yes, it's quite possible that it would be a much greater impact than the gas fields. CS, well, okay. But I mean, it is true that nobody knows? BR, no, because we know from research how the birds respond to vertical structure on the landscape. Now, I don't know how you do a wind farm without vertical structure, but if they can show me, I'm very interested. CS, well, let me ask you this. Philosophically, I can see where you're coming from on this. And by the way, I'm not trying to be antagonistic, but my job is to ask the tough questions. Is it okay if I fire one at you? BR, absolutely. You won't be the first. CS, ha. I can see that. Part of me says, in a comparison with coal, there's absolutely nothing that you could do short of a deliberate nuclear holocaust that would be worse for the 6.8 billion people on this planet than to continue to burn coal. So if it really is a trade-off between a couple of species of birds and the incredible near-term damage to every living thing on this planet, not to mention the long-term environmental damage, then maybe we do have to make a tough decision. BR, but let's make it a real trade-off first. Let's understand the parameters. And when we look at them, we don't see that as being necessary. Look at Wyoming. Realize it has 16 times the wind resources that are needed to develop the amount of wind energy suggested to be sort of our share of what's needed nationally, and you realize that there's plenty of opportunity within the already developed footprint to do this. Why in the world would our first decision be to destroy a challenged ecosystem? If you've built everything else out and can't go anywhere else, in that case we've got a real argument. CS, right. That part one understand for sure. The part one don't understand about what you just said is the thing about 16 times. I would say that we're counting on Wyoming for more than its share per capita or per square mile of land. Wyoming has wind, just like deserts have sun, mountainous regions have geothermal, etc. No, I'm talking about the way they've doled out the amounts expected from various areas. We haven't even built the resources in to take it out of here. The real problem is transmission. Guys are talking about building power lines, which are going to have their own sets of difficulties, all the way from these fields in Wyoming to the end buyers. This is all about coordination or EIS, environmental impact study, work. CS, well, I also have been speaking to the solar thermal people, who of course envision a few thousand square miles of solar thermal farms in the southwestern deserts. And it is true, I think anyway, that you're going to be messing with fewer species, because you're talking desert there. But at the same time you're certainly going to have to transmit the power out of there. You're going to be doing some kind of grid build-out that includes high-voltage DC. Well, I wish they'd talk more about that. Because they keep talking AC. And it's hung AC. It's not buried DC. It's hanging this maximum 500 kilovolts line 15 miles apart because of some very old regulations. And it's using new corridors in so many cases, instead of multiple use of both corridors. And so there's an awful lot of discussion that needs to occur here. And I'm not the expert on all this. But I do know what I've worked on with the Western Governors Association and what I've worked on in Wyoming, and I can assure you that this has not been studied, planned, or delivered in any way that we can have confidence that we're ready to roll with it. I keep hearing terms like smart grid, and then I look at what's planned for wind, and every wind zone or hub is to be backed up with a fossil fuel plant? How is that smart? You know, the grid should be taking those electrons as they come and doing it smart and taking it from fossil when it has to, but taking it from renewables when possible. We're not even talking about segregating lines. The Wilderness Society has told me how concerned they are about building new transmission for wind-up in the east in Wyoming. And that revitalizes, this is the potential, not a reality, but revitalizes the 5 coal-fired plants that were planned for up there at one point. That's just wrong. And we have not planned this. I have a real problem with the way we've done this stimulus funding, because we're telling these guys you have to have a shovel in the ground by next fall or no stimulus money. It's like an Oklahoma land rush. It's the wind rush. And we're screwing ourselves by doing it. There's no doubt in my mind that we are setting up some just horrible errors. And so for me to say okay, yeah, I should step back and go pro-wind and to hell with the sagebrush, I can't do it. CS, no, I'm with you. Well, I am particularly appalled at the idea that these things have to have co-located coal-fired power plants as backup. Are you sure about this? Well, this is what we were told. This is what we were doing. The REZ, the Renewable Energy Zone, the QRAs, the Qualified Resource Areas, and all this work with the Environment and Lands Committee and the Western Governors Association. There were wind power folks on all these committees, and they insisted that we build hubs instead of renewable energy zones because we were able to get out of the guessing game of what might be there in the way of resources other than wind, other than solar, other than geothermal, so that we'd stay out of that battle and get something done. We set up hubs because they said we have to be within a 50-mile radius of the hub. And as soon as we said that, they said yes, and we have to have a place in that hub for a backup plant for when the wind's not blowing, so we can have a fossil fuel-fired backup generator. That's not a smart grid. CS, you can't say that again. Now the really bizarre thing about coal, and I couldn't agree with you more about the burning of it, don't take me wrong, But the thing about coal is we built protections into their systems, because they were considered maximal surface disturbance. We built forced systems requirements for pre-planning, SMCRA, Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, a federal regulation that controls the way coal is developed. First you have to have a plan for reclamation before you can even start to dig. You can't do anything without having it figured out. What you do about the species that are there, what you do about the land that is there, and they have become pretty darn dependable. They've got a regular culture, including permanent staff, that works on making sure they're doing their reclamation and improving habitats and all those things that are required. On the other hand, the cleaner fuels, both wind and gas, do not operate under SMCRA because they are considered minimal surface disturbance. Now you only have to see a wind farm to know that that's not true, but nonetheless they are considered minimal. So now we've got federally approved safety roads all through these gas fields, so you know in many cases 60 to 70 foot wide road beds that go everywhere in these fields, and some of them are 10-acre developments. So it's massive surface disturbance. But because of the way the regulation is done, they're exempted. You find no requirements that they do anything about the environment they're damaging. So though coal does the greater harm in the air, they're much easier to get along with on the ground. And wind doesn't figure it falls into any of this. We're working with technology that was developed in 1942 and is virtually unchanged. I just have to believe we can do our homework better on that one. CS, yes, well I see where you're coming from. Now I often make the point in my blog posts that we as a nation seem wedded to this idea of 5 or 6 or 8 different sources of power. And it seems to me, I live on a horse farm here in California, and if I were going to take this place off the grid, I don't think I'd be having geothermal holes dug and wind turbines in the pastures and solar panels over on top of the barn. I'd just pick the best one and do it. I don't see the imperative to have all these things balanced at the same time anyway. I am with you. I am very much in favor of renewables. But I did hear something really interesting Jon Stewart said on The Daily Show night before last, talking to Al Gore. Tell us the one thing we need to do. And I know that's oversimplifying, because nobody really can tell you the one thing, but we sure do need to get our requisites in order. CS, right. The other thing I wondered, based on talks I've had with other folks, is this: does big oil and big coal protect its turf with very cozy relationships with lawmakers? Yes, they have the biggest lobby in the world. CS, yes. You must see a lot more of this than I do from my desk here in California. If you were king of the world, are there things that you would make sure never happened again? Well, first of all, we would see that we never had a 2005 Energy Act again. This is where we said that energy development is paramount over all other interests on all public lands. We've still not overcome that. It created a culture within our managing agencies, and it's been devastating for them. We would never again have Dick Cheney or his offices calling field biologists in their stations around Wyoming and telling them which wells would be permitted to drill regardless of what the issues might be on that well, and that happened every other week. Never again would we have some of the mining misbehaviors we had. I'm sure you saw the cases of sexual misconduct amongst the agency folks in dealing with the mining group out here, Lands and Minerals. We would not have nearly the relationship between any of the federal employees and these engaged industries that we have, where we have industry deciding what reclamation looks like, and industry deciding what impacts are acceptable. We've created a really sorry situation. and we can't really blame the staff when they've been under this for so long that they don't know who they work for anymore. You may have seen the article on categorical exclusions. Is the BLM practicing safe sex? Playing on safe sex? CS, CX categorical exclusion? Could you explain that, please? BR, right. This was especially true in the gas fields. If you saw an area you wanted to drill, and if you did it on a minimal basis, you'd get what was called a categorical exclusion from doing an environmental impact study. You didn't really have to do anything, you just walk in and drilled your well experimentally and saw whether or not you got gas. And so they did a lot of this. And what they would do is build out a field, planning ahead. They didn't tell anybody this, and I'm maybe being presumptive in saying this is exactly how they're done, but they drill as many wells as they could get done while under categorical exclusion. And only when almost all the damages were done, they would then file for an EIS to do full field development. And so you had the effect of a full field, avoiding all the environmental work by doing categorical exclusion. CS, I see. Let me ask you this. The renewables people, in this case wind, pretty much exclusively, have disappointed you. Are you saying that they are truly worse than the fossil fuel people, or that you expected better from people who ostensibly wanted a cleaner, better world? In other words, it's not that they behave worse, it's just that you expected better. BR, yes. You know, I told someone the other day, and I'd pretty well be prepared to defend this, the wind guys have acted like the gas guys on steroids. It's really unfortunate. I think that's forced though, by what I talked about with the supplemental funds that are based around getting the shovel in the ground now. We've set up a land rush. What did we expect? CS, wow. I knew that this was going to be a tearjerker, and I was right. It's a very sad story. And you must live it every day. BR, oh, more than I care to. Take this away from our discussion, my favorite word of late has been deliberative. I want to see a deliberated approach. Don't just rush out there and start slapping up a wind farm. All you have to do is start looking at the structure here, including, which everybody fails to do, the footings in the ground. They're talking about a cement plant in Cheyenne, a new cement plant, which will be a new polluter in and of itself. Just to be able to put in the footings for these wind farms, we need to be looking at all of this. You know, we were crying about honeybees a year ago. We're losing them on a planetary basis at an incredible rate. We need to pay attention to bats too. We're incredibly dependent on some bats, far more than we realize. And these wind farms just wreak havoc on bat life. They suck their lungs right off their face. I mean, the work on that is enough to just break your heart, especially if you're a fan of living things. CS, I'm with you. Brian, thank you so much and keep up the good fight. BR, to be sure. Especially if you're a fan of living things, a clever irony, I thought. For more information on this contributor, please visit http://2greenenergy.com/ renewable-energy-facts-fantasies/